Hello, hello. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Savvy and the Rum Lab channel here today. And we are with the amazing Worst But Rum Maker series with your host, Matt Patrick, and his guest from the Worst But channel, Robert, the Worst But program. And I'll let Matt get into those details. Matt, I leave you here in good hands. And Robert, I leave you in good hands with Matt.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Petty. It's a pleasure to be back here. This is I think the 12th or 13th in our Icon series, which are interviews that I, as a community envoy for WORSPA, have hosted with people who have had an immense influence on Caribbean rum in the last 50 years or so. So people like Kamal Samaru or Yasuper Sode or Joyce Spence, all our icons. And it's my distinct honor and pleasure to interview them and sort of go behind the scenes, talk with them about the things that we don't normally talk about. The normal interviews, sort of, I don't want to say superficial, but we like to get down and nerdy with the rum talk. So today it is my distinct pleasure to have Robert Henriques. I met him back in this past November while I was in Jamaica, and Robert is an extremely important part of Jamaican rum history in the last several decades, including he's worked for Wray Nephew. He played a seminal role in the changes to New Yarmouth distilleries. So there's a whole lot of history here, which we're going to get to, and then we're going to talk about Robert's influence on rum. So, Robert, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Matt. Glad to be here. And whoever is listening in, nice to, I don't see you, but welcome anyway.
All right. Well, thank you. All right. So let's get started. So, Robert, your family has a long history in Jamaica, the Henriques family. Am I saying that right? Is it Henriques, or how do you say it?
Oh, yes. We've had a very, very long history
Yeah.
in Jamaica. And
Mhm.
it goes way back to about 1856. Hello?
Hello. Yeah. I'm
Yes,
listening.
it goes way back to 1856 with
Right.
one of my great-grandfathers who worked with a company in Jamaica called Pruden and Cox. He had 8 children in all. Wonder how he had time to work, but he had 8 children, and 7 of them were boys and 1 girl, and one of the boys died. But he managed to school his children up to about age 14 when he took them out and homeschooled them, I guess in engineering, because most of them turned out to be pretty good engineers. So that's where we go way back. But I don't think you want to go that far back, other than to say that, I don't remember the actual date, but it was certainly probably in the very late 1800s or very early 1900s, where probably late they built a power station on one of our rivers. And that power station had a pipeline that was very, very long and extremely big. And that ran all the electricity for the tram cars in Jamaica. And I think that's the first job my grandfather helped his father with in Jamaica before leaving Jamaica.
If I remember correctly, when we were talking, you talked about your family was involved with the Panama Canal and things like that.
Yes, my grandfather worked in the office of the chief engineer. I think he was an assistant to him. And my grand uncle worked in the office of the general manager. I think there was another brother that was working there, but I'm not too sure about that. I think there was one other brother working on the canal. And my grandfather came home and leave in 1907 when the earthquake hit Kingston very badly and smashed it up. He however they did it then, he sent messages to his brothers all over the world to come back to Jamaica because there was an opportunity there. So, but they had worked, he had two of his brothers working in New York on the building of the Grand Central Station. They built a railroad in Ecuador. And it's interesting to know that one of the brothers, that's senior Dossie Henriques, was a tremendous artist. And he had an opportunity to do some character drawings for Disney. And Disney asked him to join them. And he said no, he was going back to Jamaica. But his caricatures were used in the first Disney show.
Oh, interesting. I had not heard that story.
Yeah. So he was really a fantastic artist. He did very well with it and did many paintings back in Jamaica.
Right. Now, your family as well, they were not just engineers. They sort of branched out in other businesses. Can you share any of the ones we might have heard of?
Well, sure. There are a number of them, but the interesting ones is they came back and started a partnership called Henriques Construction. And in 1908, my granduncle wrote a letter to Henry Ford I asking for the agency of the Ford Motor Company. And he eventually got a reply granting the agency, which made KIG the first agent for Ford outside of the United States. And that continues in a company called Kingston Industrial Garage right up to today.
Oh, wow. That's over 100 years being the agent for Ford in
Absolutely.
Jamaica.
No, Henriques brothers sold it out. That was in the time when my brother was chairman and the two of us were really working. We sold it to Wray Nephew, which we had an interest in. Subsequently, when Wray Nephew was sold to Campari, they sold that to another family here who has continued the Ford tradition.
Okay.
And recognizes, how long ago it was.
Right. And we're going to touch on more of that a bit later in our discussion here. But tell me about so again, your family was engineers and had many agencies in different fields. But when did the family first sort of get large scale into the sugar industry? Approximately when was that, and what were they doing?
Well, they got into the sugar industry in 1936. When they bought New Yarmouth as a farm. There was no factory there. And we were cane farmers to the Money Musk Sugar Factory, which was like 8 or 10 miles away from us. And that continued until about 1948, when the factory started to work at New Yarmouth. And we started to run our own sugar operations there. Started the first crop in 47, 48. And that made 10,000 tons of sugar. But I'll tell you what was interesting in the development of that farm is that we probably had about, my memory serves me correctly, probably about 7 wells on the farm area. Some of them pretty deep. But my grandfather, he was a water diviner, and he divined every one of those wells. And of course had somebody else dig them, and they all produce water. So they all had their own little ways, and they all worked as brothers, and they just decided to work and build something in Jamaica.
Yeah. So you said they bought the New Yarmouth estate, which was a farm. They built the sugar factory. Was a distillery part of that factory?
Yes, it was a part of the factory. Very small, 3 or 4 pot stills. Really just making 1 mark of rum. And as you would probably hear later, over the years, it was eventually developed and in capacity increased, etc. at New Yarmouth.
Yeah, we will definitely talk about that a bit later. So, so I would say, I think it's fair to say your family's sort of initial entry to rum, as you mentioned, was New Yarmouth. But at some point, New Yarmouth and Wray Nephew became very heavily related. Your family owned and operated New Yarmouth for many decades. And then, if I remember correctly, you bought into Wray and Nephew around 1957. Like, how was that connection between your family and the Wray and Nephew entity? How did that evolve over the decades?
Well, Matt, when the sugar factory started, there was absolutely really no real thing between Wray Nephew and New Yarmouth, other than the fact that we sold them some of our pot still rum. Then in 1957, it came to the attention of my father that Wray Nephew was up for sale. He contacted his brother, who was off the island at the time, who was then the chairman of the company. And he said, oh gosh, let's get going on that. So he came back and negotiations started. And it is interesting to know that when the negotiations were finished, there was a company called Consolidated International Limited. And that company was owned 1/3 by a company in Jamaica called Lascelles de Mercado, 1/3 by Henriques brothers, and 1/3 by Seagram's with Sam Bronfman. And Sam and my uncle were the two negotiators in the purchase of Wray Nephew. After a few years, Seagram's wanted out, so there was a reorganization, and Wray Nephew Group was formed with Henriques brothers and Lascelles owning 85%. And the general public, I think, owned 15%. And I use those are very close. It may have been 14 or it may have been 16, but that's my memory of it.
Yeah, and I can tell you, for someone who's tried to track down the history of the Henriques brothers and Lascelles and Consolidated International and J. Wray Nephew, there was a period from about like 1960 for many decades where this company would become that company and then get bought by this company, and it's an incredibly convoluted story to try to tell. So
absolutely. And I'm not going to try and tell you that here because that is just too convoluted at the moment. Right. I'd have to go back into files, etc., to find out what really went.
Yeah, I've made my best effort, but I can tell you it's convoluted. So
no, and the persons who did it meant it to be like that.
Excellent. Okay, so you're related to another Icon Series interviewee we've done here. Can you tell us about the family connection?
Oh, Michael Delivanti. Mm-hmm. Yes, he was my cousin. We were associated for many years. And we still are. We talk to each other up to the other day quite frequently. He has a far better memory than me, and that's probably because he's a bit younger than me. He went away and studied to be a chemical engineer, came back to Jamaica and joined Wray Nephew. And without going into a lot of detail, he went to live at Appleton, and he was put in charge of the distillery. Our consultant at the time was a Mr. Banks, can't remember his first name. Michael and himself worked together. And I think Michael learned a lot from him about fermentation, etc. And Michael did a very, very good job of running Appleton. Appleton production went up. A lot of new things were put in this distillery. And generally speaking, I think the family was probably not upset because we understood, but was sorry to see him leave Jamaica at the time that he did. So when he left Jamaica, and Michael and myself were, he used to tell me a lot about rum and the distilleries, as my real training was on the sugar side of it. So I was thrown into not day-to-day operations, but generally speaking, to manage the two distilleries when Michael left. But he's a fine distiller, a very, very good man.
Yeah, and I've enjoyed chatting with him not only as part of the Icon series, but even after the Icon series. We've shared notes and I've asked him many questions about Wray Nephew and back 50 years or so ago. So it's a pleasure.
Yeah, he's a bit of a historian, you know.
Yeah. And he's put out a couple of books that are quite interesting, filled with all sorts of good details. So, but back to you. What was your education before you joined the family business? Like, what prepared you to sort of jump in to the Henriques Wray Nephew family?
Wow. Well, when I was at school, I think my dad said, "Boy, this guy is really having more fun at school than he's working." So one day he came and said, "What do you want to be?" I said, I wouldn't mind being an engineer." He said, "Okay." So I left school and I worked with my uncle as an apprentice at Kingston Industrial Works, which was started by my grandfather in 2008. I'm sorry, 1908, not 2008. And then I went to England to George Fletcher and Company. They had a course there for what they referred to as premium apprentices. So you are an apprentice during the day and you went to technical college to get high national certificates, which were quite good in those days. And then after that, I came back. I never completed the course 100% there. Came back and got a job as a shift engineer at Muddy Musk.
Okay. That was my next question. So
where I met one of your other icons was Evan Brown.
Oh yes, Evan, and I love Evan. So I did, and I actually did not know that. I did not know that you worked with Evan at the time.
Well, Evan was in the management section.
Okay.
He had the 8 to 4 job.
Okay. And approximately when was that?
I came back to Jamaica in 1956.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. So So in those days when you first joined, you really had nothing to do immediately with rum. It was all sugar. Is that fair to say?
The only thing we had with rum is that Monimus had a distillery. And as a shift engineer, you were in charge of the distillery. But it really was like a second to us. If we had a problem and we had to shut down anything, the first thing that went was the distillery.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, it goes to show that again at that time, so much of the industry was focused more on the sugar. The sugar was considered more valuable than the rum in most cases.
Well, it's quite true. In the first 3 or 4 years of Wray Nephew, sugar paid their bills. Wray Nephew, the rum side, was doing very, very bad. Okay. And when Billy McConnell got there, he had to ask them to stop selling and go and collect.
Interesting.
But sugar was doing extremely well.
Good. Okay.
And they paid the bills.
So when did you first sort of like get thrust into focusing on rum a little bit?
When Michael left,
okay,
I started to take more of an interest in it. We had a distillery manager called Alty McKenzie who took over from Michael, and he ran a good show, and the two of us worked together. He was the day-to-day manager, but at those days, I was perhaps the manager of the entire estate.
Okay.
Or the director in charge of the estate, should I say.
Yeah, and when was that, and which estates were they? Which distilleries, I guess?
That was New Yarmouth and Appleton at those days, yeah.
Okay, so 1970 or so, or?
About 1978, I think, is when my my uncle died, and I took his positions on the spirits pool and on the Sugar Manufacturing Corporation of Jamaica,
Okay.
and
Yeah,
became
and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment here. But so once you were essentially in charge, overseeing Appleton and New Yarmouth, what were some of the technical improvements you made since once you started there?
well. At New Yarmouth, we eventually put in a big still, a 5,000-gallon still there, which was made
Pot still, I'm assuming.
pot still,
Yeah.
which was made by a company called Vendome
Okay.
in
Kentucky. Yeah.
That's right. And that was kind of like the major thing at New Yarmouth at the time. Later on, we did bigger fermenters in metal, as we used to have wooden, a lot of wooden fermenters. So that was basically some of the changes in the distillery at New Yarmouth. We had no pots, no column still then. We were really making a pot still mark that Wray Nephew wanted.
Okay.
That was very important to Wray Nephew.
Okay. So this would have been in the late 1970s you're talking about here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about Appleton? Any over improvements in Appleton or enhancements to Appleton?
Well, yeah, Michael, did a lot of improvements there. Even after the company in which he worked closed in Canada, he came back to work with us, and he made a design for stills, which we bought. I think it was from a Canadian company, Canadian Vickers, I think.
Right.
And also we expanded and put in metal fermenters at Appleton, which I was in charge of that job with a company out here called Tankwell.
Okay.
And that was very interesting because the gentleman running in that company was a heck of a good construction engineer, and we couldn't get sand to mix the concrete.
Oh, interesting.
And he eventually said, Robert, we're going to try something. And we used marl and to do the foundations. And every one of them we put to a test, and only one of those foundations failed. And we locked it down and did it again. And it all depended on the mixture and the amount of marl you used, whether you could get it right. And they're still there holding up the fermenters.
So this is 50 years that these
it's a long time ago, yes.
that these fermenters and their foundations are still there.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I assume that, well, let me put it this way. I haven't been to Appleton for a number of years, so I assume they're still there. I haven't heard that they've been taken out.
We'll have to find out.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like I think what you're, big picture, what you're saying is that in the 1970s, both the Appleton distillery and the New Yarmouth distillery sort of went through a substantial modernization process.
Absolutely. And, for me to pick out each and every step, it would take us all day to go through the whole thing.
Well, someday I want to do that. But
okay,
but not here.
We'll do that with Michael. He has it all historically set out.
Oh, that would be a fun interview. So
we made a lot of improvements in the sugar side of it.
Right, for sure. So I think one of my favorite topics, and I think amongst the super enthusiasts in the rum community, is the high ester rum. And you mentioned New Yarmouth had been operating since 1948, but probably not making the high ester rum it's known for today. So my understanding is you sort of like led New Yarmouth into a new era in the 1990s. Just tell us this story and spare no detail.
Okay, well, we made representation to government to lease on a very long term a farm called Holland. And we got that farm. And when I went down there and started to look around, I noticed that there was a very small boiler sitting there. So after a few years of after we had got the farm up and running with what we wanted, and it's interesting to know that that farm had not sugarcane, but it had mangoes and citrus on it. I looked at this boiler and I said, wow, this thing still works. So I called Alti and I said, Alti, meet me down here at Holland. And he came down and I said, Alti, I think we can make a high ester rum. Let's try down here. He said, but we don't have a still. I said, okay, I know where to get one. So I ran up to Kingston, and in their display room, which they still have today at Appleton, was a still on display for people to come and look at, a small still. So along with a lot of objections from Billy, after I convinced him that what we were going to do, and I said I wanted it confidential, he said, okay, take the still. So I took it down there and I installed it, and we put some 45-gallon drums in, and we started to make a high ester rum. And after Joyce Spence had said to us, look, I think we're on the right track. And this is after many samples. Mm-hmm. She tried it out and she said, yes, it could work. And then I said, well, the right place to do this is at New Yarmouth. And we selected the position for the new still very carefully, because we didn't want anything going from there into the existing distillery. So it was eventually built there. And then a company in Germany came to us and said, look, Robert, we like what you're making. We want to buy your entire distillery. Well, Bill and myself discussed it. And it was decided not to give it to them. And that we started to produce. And I found some old stills. I put them together. Nothing new was in the distillery. I bought some old tanks from Rivera, a bauxite company. I put that in there. We literally built it piece. And today, I think I assume they're still making rum and Wray Nephew bought most of our production.
Okay, so would it be fair to say that there was this New Yarmouth distillery that started in 1948 was making sort of, I would call it, regular rum.
That's right.
And you came along and essentially within some distance of that distillery built like an entirely separate distillery to make high ester rum. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement, yes. And Michael was involved with me in helping to do the structure of the thing. He wasn't working full-time with us, if I remember rightly, but he was a consultant with us. But there was another man in that distillery who I cannot forget, called Hugh Murdoch. Mm-hmm. He started life as running a still, and let me tell you, there is not many people could outclass him in his knowledge of distillation. Right. He was just an excellent man.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, there was another consultant who helped with bringing New Yarmouth up, who may have come from another distillery.
That's right. That's quite correct. Winston Kennedy, who started life as a sugar technologist at Frome, and he retired from Hamden Distillery and Hamden Sugar altogether. And I had him. And when he saw what I was doing, he said, my God, Robert, I didn't know you'd gone this far. I said, well, there are. He said, but you're missing one ingredient in the muck tank. And I said, what's that? And he told me, which I will not repeat what it is on this mobile. And we put it in there. And that really made a difference then to the highest rum. Everybody in Germany and in Jamaica wanted it.
Right. So what was where did you sort of get when you first started, before Winston came about or came to help out? Where did you get your sort of your recipe for high ester? Like what sort of, where did you start from?
We just started with stuff what we heard
Mhm.
might be going into the Hamden
Okay.
fermenting house, and we started with that, and I think we got pretty close to it. And we just this is just one ingredient. Winston said, I didn't know. I said, well, Winston, I do listen from time to time to what people say, and I just thought maybe if we did this and did that. And Alti said, let's try this and try that. And we did a lot of trials at Holland before we even sent a sample to Joy.
Okay. And was this was Owen Tulloch still around at that time, or had he retired by that point?
Sorry, who is that?
Owen Tulloch, was he still around, or had he retired?
Oh yes, Owen was there. Yes, Owen was there at the time. I think yes, Owen hadn't retired yet.
Okay. So okay. So speaking of New Yarmouth and these high ester rums, some of the marks that we have that we know of the New Yarmouth today, the NYE, WK, HM, RH. Share with us, because I think you're in a unique position to share with us what each of those mean. So
well, the HM is Hugh Murdoch, which was the distiller down there, who contributed a lot to it. And that was really the high ester rum, the highest you could go. And then the next one was NYRH, which was me. And then the next one down the line was NYEWM, which was Billy McConnell, who was William. And then the last one down the line was WK, which was Winston Kennedy. So it was really, really the marks for all of us that put in to the high ester.
Okay. So the people who contributed to
who were really working full time at the time that we did it.
Right. And again, very separate from the marks made by the larger distillery that predated.
Yes, okay. Absolutely.
So you mentioned Billy McConnell, and he was, sort of led Wray Nephew for many years, I think starting in the early 1970s. You worked alongside him for many years, decades. What were your respective roles in the company, and then share some memories of working with him?
When I first joined Wray Nephew, I could start there. I knew Billy from before he became the managing director. He was first employed as the financial manager for Wray Nephew. He and I were quite good friends, and we used to socialize a little bit. Billy became the managing director. And let me say that Billy was an extremely good businessman, knew business, and he knew pretty well when people got into positions, how to deal with them. He was just generally an excellent manager. Billy and myself, when I first joined, both himself and Billy's boss, I suppose, George Ashenheim, who was not the chairman, but he was a substantial shareholder. They asked me if I would take over when Henriques brothers sold out to them, if I would take over the management of the sugar estates as the director in charge. But each estate had a manager. And I said, yes, I would do that. So Billy and myself worked together very closely on this. On many occasions when, sugar prices go up and come down, and you lose money and you make money and this sort of thing. And a lot of people who we would have liked to have had with us had already left Jamaica. So it was a bit of a trying time on the sugar side. But one of the things that kept us going, really, is the fact that the raw material for rum is molasses. And we needed to have not just a rum, a sugar, industry. We needed to have a molasses industry that could supply as much of the raw material at the very best price than going abroad. Well, this evolved where in the I hope I get my dates right now, about 1994, I think it was, Billy called me and said, Robert, the Prime Minister wants to see us. And they had just won to become the government. And Michael Mann just taken back over the things. And he said to us, I need to get sugar going again. I need to get it out to the government hands. Can you arrange to get it privatized again? We started to work on that, incidentally, for the second time.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, he died, and unfortunately he died, and it just never went anywhere. And then the new Prime Minister and the then Minister of Finance called and asked us again. And this time it went through, and we formed a company called the Sugar Company of Jamaica. And that Sugar Company of Jamaica ran Bernard Lodge, Monimus, Frome, as the three biggest estates. That was an ownership between a local merchant bank, Wray Nephew, and Booker Tate, who needed the sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And we got those running pretty well up to date, and we had the molasses increase, etc. And then one thing and another, it went back to government. I don't think I need to go into that. And so really what Billy and myself wanted was to have a big supply of molasses for Wray Nephew. And that was it, because as the molasses price goes up abroad, if you have your own, it remains profitable and best for you. So overall, Billy and myself worked quite closely together. He was an extremely good manager. I have a lot of respect for him, and we just ticked it off. Well,
yeah. So I think when we met, you described it as like Billy was in charge of everything in Kingston in the business, and you were in charge of everything outside of Kingston. Is that a fair assessment?
That's essentially how it was. But Billy, essentially, as a manager, managing director of Wray Nephew, was really in charge of everything, including, I mean, can I say it was the same company? But he asked me to look after everything outside of Kingston.
Yeah, so sort of essentially the agricultural side of the business.
The agricultural side of it, yes, okay. That's correct.
Okay. So you mentioned briefly this earlier. You said you were active in WRSPA activities and on WRSPA, would attend WRSPA meetings. Tell us about your experience representing J. Wray Nephew in the WRSPA organization.
Well, you know, the real person and the real representative for WRSPA was Evan Brown. Evan Brown was on the board of WRSPA representing Jamaica. But Evan was very much in favor of as many people from the various companies to come and sit in those meetings, which I did a number of them. I made it my thing to go and hear what was going on with the other companies around the West Indies. And so I used to go down quite a bit with Evan, not just to general meetings, but to one or two board meetings. And you sat in the background, but, you know, Evan always said, tap me on the shoulder if you want to say something or make a point. So I just made it my personal interest to go and do that. And I learned a lot from it. And I met some really nice people, you know. One of them I spoke to several weeks ago was Patrick Mears. You know, Patrick was very dynamic, and
yeah,
No,
and another Icon Series interview. And I've when I was in Barbados last year, I met with Patrick for 3 hours. So
yeah. That's Patrick's a nice guy. He's a good person, and
Yeah.
I learned a lot from him as well, and from Evan.
yeah, and I think this what you're talking about is, even though you weren't the official WORSPA representative, you were still there attending meetings, and I think you still see this today. I know that each country has its representative, but representatives from other distilleries are also there, so that tradition continues.
Yes, and some of the meetings went on probably a little longer than we wanted it, but there was always a good hospitality room.
Right.
And you got a chance to taste everybody else's rum. Never was I critical about them. I didn't like all of them, but I was never critical to anybody about them.
That's important.
But we all met together as literally a team. Tommy Gatcliffe, great man.
Yes, I know. John Georges speaks very highly of him.
Yes, no, he was an excellent man, Tommy.
Yes. So let's jump a little bit. Now we're in the 2000s, and the Caribbean Rum Sector Program, which not many people know about. It essentially played a transformative role in helping many Caribbean distilleries within the WORSPA organization, helped many Caribbean distilleries partially fund significant upgrades, not only their equipment but also in their marketing and branding, things like that. What were some of the highlights of the Caribbean Rum Sector Program as it applied to J. Wray and Nephew?
Well, we got, I think, a still or two out of it. Yes, it was an excellent program, hardly fought by Patrick and Evan and some other members of the board.
Yasu, I believe, yeah.
Yeah, and Yasu, absolutely. And so, yes, we got to Wray Nephew. I can't really remember, honestly, the details offhand, but I think we got a still out of it. One of the pot stills, I think, came out of that. And some other areas at New Yarmouth. I don't think, I think some of the fermenters actually came out of that.
Yeah, but yeah, these are, again, sort of the idea here was it was money funded by the European Union.
That's right.
There's a whole backstory we don't need to get into, but essentially it was co-funding so that distilleries could upgrade, become more competitive, and hopefully transition from bulk products to premium branded rums.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And many conversations over that and how we could get it going with a trademark and a special mark because you're in the WORSPA member and this sort of thing. It did a lot of good, I think, for the industry, and I'm always sorry that it stopped, that it couldn't go on, because it could have done a lot of good today.
I agree. One reason I'm here today is partially because of that program, and it led to my connection with WORSPA and going to Jamaica for the first time. And so
that's good.
Yeah. So outside of J. Wray Nephew, you were on the boards of several other rum and sugar committees. Tell us a little bit about other parts of the industry that you were involved with on a committee level.
Well, there was a Spirits Pool of Association, of which at the time Evan was chairman, and I sat on that board, as I said, for quite some time after my uncle died. I was put on that board. And then there was a molasses company, Caribbean Molasses, of which I was the chairman, and Evan was vice chairman, and he was chairman of Spirits Pool, and I was. And it was quite amusing. Sometimes they used to tease us that when we went to meetings, he sat at one end of the table and I sat at the other. And when the Spirits Pool was finished, everything was passed over now to the other end of the table. And I think we did a lot of good on it. We the molasses prices abroad were varied. We looked at many things. We tried high test molasses. We did a lot of things. Lloyd Forbes was the manager.
Yeah.
And
Another Icon Series interviewee. So we're
Absolutely.
connecting all the dots here. So.
And he's very, very, very good manager then. So that was the rum side of it. I sat on the Sugar Manufacturing Corporation, representing both New Yarmouth and Appleton. And we did that for a number of years. And then Billy came on as chairman for a while. Evan was there representing National Rums, who had a sugar factory at the time, or not National Rums, National Sugar.
Right.
So those were kind of like my major things. I mean, another board or two outside that had really nothing to do with sugar or rum.
So for those who aren't familiar with it, and I know a little bit, tell us a little bit about what was the purpose of the Caribbean Molasses Corporation.
Well, they purchased all the molasses for all the distilleries.
Okay.
And they ran the ports, the two ports, one in the Grill, not in the Grill, just outside Montego Bay, Hanover, I think it is, and one down in Clarendon. We ran those two ports where we received molasses. And in the very old time days, we used to ship molasses from there.
Mm-hmm.
But that's essentially what we did. We went out for pricing. We looked after the ports. And, Lloyd Forbes fell into all of this. Although he was Spirits Pool Association, he was also Caribbean Molasses.
Yeah.
So that was really the essential. It was an elderly company that we took over and ran it that way for the purchase and distribution of molasses.
Right. Yeah, I think it shows the importance of even, this is not that long ago that the rum companies, the individual producers would still cooperate on things of interest to all of them. So instead of having everybody, competing for molasses and everybody trying to source their own,
that's right.
It made sense. And I think that's sort of on a much larger scale is what WRSPA is about the things of common interest to rum producers across the Caribbean. Yes,
and that is essentially what should be, and probably still is happening in Jamaica. That's what the Spirits Pool did, that we all sat together and we acted as one. I don't recall in my entire time at Spirits Pool ever having more than a hand vote.
Mm-hmm.
And if it was really objectionable to one distillery, we used to say, hold on, we find another way. We used to all work together.
Yeah.
And Wray Nephew controlled the vote,
but
it was never, ever used by Wray Nephew. Never.
And I think that's the way it should be. So your son, Paul, is also in the rum industry. Tell us a little bit about what Paul does.
Paul's an accountant. He's a certified public accountant, CPA. Came back and worked on the Billy for a number of years. Then when Billy left at just about the time of the sale, the first sale, Paul was made managing director of Wray Nephew. After a number of years there, he left and he went to work with Worthy Park, who are also rum people. So, but Paul, before he became managing director, he took over from me and ran the sugar side of it and the agricultural side of it. So he was well tuned on both sectors. And now it's Worthy Park, he's a financial controller there.
Okay.
And he actually bought into Worthy Park, so he's working for himself.
Excellent. And if I remember correctly, there's another family connection you have with Worthy Park.
Well, yes. My daughter, Nicola, she married Gordon Clark, who's now the managing director of Manor Park, of Worthy Park. So they're both down there in the estate. I have to see my children. I have to drive miles to go and see them. But I don't do that. I let them drive miles and come and see me.
So, one final question for you, unless anybody pops up in questions at the last second. So, Caribbean rum has undergone some enormous changes since you started in the 1950s. Can you share your thoughts on how Caribbean rum should or can or should continue to elevate itself?
That's a very difficult question.
We like them hard here. So
yeah, I'm not really in the day-to-day. I know of what's going on. From time to time, I speak to people, but I sometimes get the feeling that there is not enough coordination between everybody. I think that I understand there's a big thing going on now about sugar and rum, and I think Jamaica is, from what I've heard, is against it. And but there appears to be some people in Barbados who own a lot of the rum distilleries over there want to have this. I think they need to forget about fighting it elsewhere, and they need to sit down and really try to sort this thing out. I don't see why we should change our rum standard. Caribbean rum, when are we going to outprice ourselves with the raw material? Jamaica has decided to abandon sugar. Therefore, with the exception of one distillery, every other distillery has to buy expensive overseas rum.
Molasses. Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense to me when you have the ability to produce your own raw material while you're going to spend a lot of money to buy it overseas. Okay. If the sugar price is down and you're losing money, it's going to happen. The sugar price, ever since I've known, has been like a malaria chart. It's up and down, up and down. So to me, it's a bit of a sad story. Barbados, I hear, is cut back. And a lot of the distillers are buying. It's one of these days, and it's going to find that maybe they've outpriced themselves.
Right. I think what you're talking about is a substantial part of the story of rum in the last 50 years, that sugar has become uneconomical. And where it was once the Caribbean was exporting most molasses, now they're importing molasses. And so I feel like we're seeing today, in the last 5 or 10 years, we're seeing producers take on a different approach, and like utilizing more of the molasses. And we see projects like Mount Gay, for example, buying cane lands and building their own sugar factories. So I feel like it's been a challenge, but I think I'm glad to see that many of the producers are responding and in many ways sort of reconnecting, with the agricultural past of, connecting the entire estate to the agricultural past and future of rum. So,
well, I mean, right now I hear the sugar price is pretty good, and I agree with you. They should be investing heavily in sugar right now. Mm-hmm. And they may find that the economics, if they work it out, is not all that bad to do that. I mean, Billy and myself talked about this over and over and over, and there are times when Wray Nephew lost big money, but we had the molasses. Mm-hmm. And if you counter that against the price you may have had to buy it from abroad, and then perhaps a shortage. And that's why Wray Nephew went into Sugar Company of Jamaica, mm-hmm. because we would have had all the Jamaica molasses here for the rum industries, for the distilleries in Jamaica. Well, that doesn't happen. And you never export again, because some of the smaller estates cannot survive. Some of them are in distant parts of of the country, and
Right.
it's just economically not right for them.
Right.
But I think that we should be in sugar.
Right. Okay. Well, Robert, thank you. This has been very enlightening. It's been a joy to hear you tell your stories. Any final words before we sign off?
No, just to thank everybody and to say that I hope that rum will go forward in a big way in the future. And to thank you and Eduardo and everybody for putting on this and inviting me to be one of the icons. Thank you very much for that.
It is our pleasure. So again, thank you very much. Federico, you can take us out.
Yeah.